Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CoFence 2025 Predictions webinar. I'm Josh Bartolome, VP of Global Threat Services here at CoFence, and I'm joined with Max Gannon, who heads up our intelligence analytics team. And today we're excited to actually take a look back at the predictions that we made in 2024 and taking a look forward to kind of see what our predictions are for 2025. What we're going to be talking about today, we're going to cover a large spread of items. So please feel free to have any questions that you have, use our Q&A function, lean into that. Before we begin, there are a couple housekeeping items we want to make sure that we take care of. Due to the number of attendees today, we will be keeping microphones muted. So again, if you do have any questions, please leverage our Q&A function within Zoom client, and we will be answering questions towards the end of this conversation. That being said, if you do have any technical difficulties, sorry about that, or issues this morning with this webinar, please use the chat function, let us know, and we'll be, as attentive as we can to try to fix any issues that you might run into. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on CoFence's website in the next day or two for anybody that wanted to watch it post or, refer others, colleagues to it. So that being said, let's get right into it. So first off, I want to talk about to kind of level set everybody here. Who is CoFence? What are we and why are our predictions something you want to listen to, right? So CoFence, formerly PhishMe, has been in the phishing security awareness training and threat mitigation space since 2011. So, we were one of the original, if not the original pioneer in security awareness and training specific for phishing threats. Over the years, obviously, our portfolio and what we've done has expanded. And as it stands right now, 25% of the Fortune 1000 trust CoFence for our security awareness training and for our phishing risk analysis, mitigation, and intelligence. Over the years, we've provided well over 1 billion different phishing simulations to our customers. We've trained well over 35 million employees. And based on our purview with what we do and what we see, on average, we're seeing malicious emails every 30 seconds coming in that our teams are analyzing, Max teams is analyzing and publishing out to help our customers with threat identification, threat mitigation, and overall risk reduction. So let's get right into our predictions. So Max, let's kind of keep this, fluid here on our side so that we can really kind of lean into these things. So in 2024, the predictions that our leaders within CoFence kind of portrayed or kind of put out there as we relayed in the 2024 webinar. First one being email security reporting will be front and center in the boardroom in 2024. And I really do think we saw that. The cybersecurity obviously last year was kind of a hot issue. It is something that, unfortunately, a couple weeks couldn't go by without you seeing something in the news. And even based on the engagements we've had with our customers and just colleagues and others in the field, I feel that the amount of reporting up through the CEO into the board getting more invested into the conversation about threat mitigation, threat remediation, specifically for phishing, has advanced. I know I've been asked on a bunch of instances to help provide some information for our customers so they can actually provide that data based on board requests. So I see that really did happen. Max, have you kind of gotten the same?
Yeah, absolutely. And that also really ties into the next prediction we made. Everybody, of course, was talking about AI and ML, and we really predicted that it would become even more advanced and threat actors would continue to use it with malicious emails. So with AI and ML, it's kind of hard to directly point at something and say, that's AI, that's ML. You just really can't because they don't like put their logo on the bottom. What you can do is look at the gaps, though. So threat actors, for the most part, are, for lack of a better term, lazy. They will not put forth more effort than they have to. And that's why, up until very recently, you would see large numbers of not particularly well-crafted emails that were not very personalized, that were just very basic stuff, just didn't really have a lot of content. But especially through 2024, we saw an increase in highly personalized phishing emails and malware delivery emails that are really advanced. They pull in logos, they have information about the recipients, they have detailed narratives that are very convincing. They have all of this information and a lot of different languages too, not just, English, which had been the vast majority. They've been seeing it in a lot of other languages because, if you're using AI and ML, it's pretty easy to use another language. All you have to do is give it the basics and it builds it out for you. So as we've been seeing this increase in large scale, customized and advanced emails, it's really trickled back to the boardroom because they're seeing a lot more of these and it's becoming a lot more of a concern. And they're also getting through a lot more of the defenses that up until now have been very effective because it's something we'll also talk about later. But with AI and ML, you'll get like one IOC and then there'll be dynamically generated versions of it. So in the past, you'd get one IOC and you'd be able to block like 20 emails because it'd be the same IOC in each email. With AI and ML, these IOCs are dynamically generated, so you can't just block 20 emails based off of analyzing one. So the tools
Yeah.
that are involved in defense against these emails have changed. And the boardroom has recognized that and really has started to get more involved in that process.
I would agree with that. And I've seen, in the work that we've done and kind of the actual phishing emails that have been delivered to mailboxes, seen to your point, the increase in the malicious aspect of it, but also just in the overall social engineering, the BEC attacks, the business email compromise attacks. They really did seem to ramp up in 2024, which actually goes to the next line here. The cybersecurity landscape specific to, phishing, but also in general social engineering is going to have a huge spike. And I think that is actually absolutely what we saw, right? To your point about leveraging of the AI and ML, and just the scope and scale. I mean, in my opinion, and obviously, right now, just for the record, Max and I and the whole team here at Cofense are going through and qualifying and quantifying data for our annual report that'll be out in a couple of months here. So, but, while I don't have exact numbers, I mean, I'd say we were looking at double-digit increases when it comes to social engineering specific types of tech. I'm talking the BEC attacks, the scams, the methods used for, like you bought something, we already charged it, call us if, if you didn't buy it and then, you lose your credit card, it gets compromised. But that seems to build in, as you said, from that AI ML perspective because of that volume, of that surge, of that almost targeting, right? I mean, we kind of did see where even for some of these, they were mimicking services those companies actually had, which infers they were doing like some type of broad scale recon, if you will. So that way they make sure that that customer uses Salesforce, that customer uses Microsoft, that customer uses Dropbox. And they were kind of targeting that. Were you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a large part of that with AI and ML is uh, up until then, if you wanted to say send emails to all of the employees at a company, you would have to go to the dark web, see if there was a compromised database that had all their emails, try and gather all this information. With AI and ML, you can just point them at a website and say, find me all the email addresses that are related to this website and you've got this huge bank of emails that you can use. So you can target things so much more easily by just saying, here's a website, do some research for me, and it'll pull out information for you.
Yeah. And that does play into some of the news that we saw towards the last half of 2024, right? Where we saw some of these larger firms that had broad scale data collection um, being compromised and that data kind of being exfiltrated and used, which kind of stacks and racks, everything that we're seeing here from that social engineering aspect. So, kind of closing out 2024 here, our last kind of prediction here was, organizations are going to start shifting focus onto what they don't know. I mean, the reality is, cybersecurity's been bouncing around for years. I've been doing this for almost 30 years now. And you always have these themes over the years that you run into. And we're at a point now within the overall hierarchy, if you will, of cybersecurity, that our biggest problems are what we don't know. Especially over the last couple of years, we're running into when we talk about the AI and the ML, the risks and the unknown unknowns are increasing because things are moving at a much faster pace. So, we did predict, obviously, in 2024 that, organizations are going to start focusing a little bit more on threat intelligence. Why did we predict that? Because the concept was really they're going to focus on threat intelligence to help identify the unknown unknowns that they have, to identify or quantify, if you will, their risk exposure. So they kind of knew where they should focus on. And it was a rough year for it too, because obviously everything over the last couple of years from a budget stance, we've seen that consolidation in cybersecurity products, portfolios and diversity within enterprises. And, needing to lean on threat intelligence, nice curated, real time-ishness threat intelligence. I talking to our customers has really made the difference for them to kind of really hone in on where some of their gaps are that they didn't or might not have been aware of beforehand. Max, being on the Intel side, you got a position on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this again, I tie it back a lot to ANML because it's such a big trend. But with DeepSeek coming out recently in the news, I'll talk a bit about that more later. But it's really driving home the ease at which threat actors can take advantage of AI and ML. And like I talked about earlier, where you've got, you used to be able to block 20 emails from one IOC. Well, now you have one IOC, you block one email. It's the context that threat intelligence provides that allows you to take that one email, have context, and then defend yourself against it that really is helping so much with mitigating a lot of these AI and ML generated attacks. So organizations are really starting to realize that they can buy AI and ML defenses, and those will help to a certain extent, but what they really need the most to combat these threats is the context around it.
No, absolutely. So, that's our kind of recap of 2024. Again, if anybody has any questions on these, please feel free to, hit up the Q&A option in Zoom. Also, we'd be very interested in knowing anybody's interpretation or agreement, disagreement with these predictions. Did you see the same thing? Did you see something different? If you had your own top four predictions for 2024, kind of at a look back, what would you say was kind of the biggest theme that you saw within your environment, you personally? Based on your network and things like that. We're always kind of looking for that. Max and I are both kind of data hounds here. So we're always looking for more insight to make sure that, we're on par. And obviously, we want to know the unknowns as well. So that being said, let's get into 2025, right? That's why everybody's here. So, first, we have our prediction from Mark Olson, who's our CEO here at Cofense. So, in lieu of reading this verbatim, I'll highlight it here. So Mark's saying the human risk management is going to take center. That's going to be the key, right? Threat actors are exploiting AI. Threat actors are hitting up social engineering hot and heavy. And how are we mitigating that? How are we going to have to mitigate that? How are enterprises going to combat that when a lot of it we don't know what it's going to look like, right? So the Mark's position here is the people. It's always kind of been Cofense's position that the people make the difference. The people can be used as sensors in cybersecurity programs because they're the first and the last line of defense when it comes to a lot of things, especially phishing attacks, right, and social engineering attacks. So what, kind of Mark's highlighting here from this concept is security awareness programs. Again, being in cybersecurity for such a long time here, I've seen the ebbs and flows of security awareness programs. Sometimes it's a compliance checkbox. Everybody hates doing. I dislike doing them. Right, every year you got to go through the process. But when it comes to phishing simulations, we have seen a big difference in organizations that are using real phishing emails that have hit your organization as templates for your phishing simulations and training. Making sure you're staying aware of what the newest threats are that are coming out and training your employees on a more regular basis so they know, what? We're never going to send you an email from HR that has a QR code in it, right? Just kind of actioning and enabling your employees to kind of know where the lines are, or if they're not sure, how to handle something, whether it's to report it, whether it's to ignore it, how have you. And, as the sidebar here that Mark mentioned is as threat actors are continuing to leverage AI for exploits, and the exploits are technical exploits, it's for the iteration that, Max alluded to and talked about for 2024 and what we're going to talk about in a little bit. Using AI is going to be immediate. We're going to have to, kind of really leverage that. But now there's caveats with that. Just like any technology, we don't want to make sure, I mean, we want to make sure that we're not relying on anything blindly without checks and balances. So me personally, to kind of interpret Mark's here, I don't want to put words in Mark's mouth. Us for leveraging from a cybersecurity stance, AI is needed from an enrichment, automation, kind of take care of the grunt work, if you will. So that way you can have your specialists, you can have your security teams, your skilled teams look at the results and make the decisions, identify the risks, look for the anomalies. It's a double-edged sword that we got to be careful about insofar as, not entirely relying end to end 100% on AI, but using it strategically in a smart manner that helps augment and automate as much as we can to a point of decision making. So that's Mark's. I have one because I do, because I've been in this such a long time, and I've been seeing a pattern over the years, and you kind of see these ebbs and these flows, right? So my prediction for 2025 is the main risk we're going to have collectively, based on the current stack of cybersecurity and the environment, I should say, of cybersecurity, is a lack of focus. We're kind of all over the board. What do I mean by that? Between trying to do cost cutting consolidation, which I understand it happens and we all have to do it. I mean, there is no, blank check here. But then, focusing on some myopic items that maybe the risk landscape or the risk exposure isn't as high, but it's flashy. It's the new shiny, if you will. We tend to do that a lot because the staples are boring, right? If you've been in cybersecurity for more than a couple of years, the staples are boring, but they're essential, right? It's kind of like make your bed in the morning. So you go to bed, when you go to bed, it's nice and ready for you and it's clean. It's boring. Nobody wants to do it, but it's a kind of a staple. And that lack of focus means that we're a little bit fractured on our visibility, on the data that we are seeing. So we're not able to fully qualify a risk. Or that lack of focus could also be a hyper focus on one thing, which infers lack of focus on everything else. So for me, cybersecurity needs dedicated cybersecurity talent that are also data analysts. So that way we can make sense of the data, of the massive data that we have. And this is where AI, in my opinion, plays in a large amount. Data analysts will be in high demand. We have so much data, and anybody that's ever done any type of log management, SIEM management, you know what I'm talking about. We have so much data, but there's so much noise in that data. You're finding that, you're looking for a needle in a needle stack in Needletown and Needleville. I mean, it is just a little ridiculous at sometimes. Data scientists, data analysts to curate that data, to train the AI to help you curate that data, I think will help give us more focus and where we need to be as an industry and to keep our organizations safe overall. And that lack of focus, I really feel is going to be a problem overall. But again, this is also kind of that patterning that I've talked about we've seen over the years. So this isn't the first time we've kind of seen this ebb, and hopefully we can see the spike up from that. That being said, Max.
All right, so this first one's definitely my biggest prediction. We've all seen it coming for a while, and we've definitely seen it to some extent. However, what we haven't really seen is large scale. So when I talk about, large scale phishing campaigns, I'm talking about stuff like Emotet. I mean, that was huge, sending out millions of emails all over the globe, hitting up tons of people. That was big. Right now, we see, larger than average customized campaigns, but we don't see them at like large scale, like Emotet scale. So I believe that as AI powered phishing is becoming more feasible, especially with stuff like DeepSeek, where, the cost is very low and the power is very high compared to what we've had. And it's also open source. So threat actors can really easily take advantage of it to generate more convincing campaigns at a much larger scale. And the infrastructure to send it is not really all that expensive if you do it right. And you're a threat actor and don't follow the law, obviously. So I really think we're going to start seeing a lot more large scale campaigns. And because they're AI and ML powered, they're also going to be a lot harder to identify with current tools. So that's something we're going to have to work with. We're going to have to find new methods of doing these defenses. So the next prediction that I've got is really more about social platforms. So we've seen this, here and there, people abusing Meta, Twitter, a couple of other things, but we haven't really seen it at large scale, again, because it's a pain for threat actors to manually go in and leverage these social platforms. It takes effort. And the majority of them aren't willing to put forth that effort to fully leverage these tools and do as much damage as they could. But with ANML making everything easier, it's going to take so much less effort. Just a couple keystrokes, and you can initiate a campaign targeting people through social media that you don't have to do anything for. So people still, despite all of the warnings and all the things we've seen, have an innate trust of social media platforms. And as threat actors find easier and easier ways to exploit this trust, we're going to see it become more common.
No, absolutely. And Max, I do want to add one thing here too, and I meant to mention it earlier in the 2024, so I apologize for that. I mean, from when you're saying AI-powered phishing campaigns, from the convincing part, are you inferring just from an email perspective or social engineering as a whole? Because remember, like in February, was it February of 24? There was that one breach. It wasn't a breach. It was for $25 million basically was exfilled from I believe the company's name was Roop, where the finance rep basically had a Zoom call. I don't actually know if it was Zoom. I don't remember if it was Zoom or Teams or WebEx, but had a video chat with reportedly with the CEO and several other high-ranking members of their company, but it was all deep fakes. So we haven't touched on deepfake yet. And again, I apologize. I meant to ask about it earlier. But when you say AI powered, are you just talking about generation? Are you also inferring like the deepfakes from a video audio spoofing replication? Because that's kind of what happened last year. And that was a big, I mean, that was $25 million of loss for that organization, right?
Yeah, I definitely see it being used in both ways because there's a lot of different ways you can apply AML. But with especially like come back to this, but with DeepSeek being available, it's going to be easier than ever to generate anything with ANML, whether that's very convincing deepfakes of CEOs saying, I'm definitely the person you believe, give me money, or whether they're emails that are highly targeted to every single person in an organization and it lists their job title and something about HR that they don't think anyone else would know. Um,
That makes
it's
sense.
really easy to exploit it either way now that the tools are there and open source.
And based on what we've seen, right? So if we're talking like BEC attacks, for those that aren't aware, most BEC attacks start with an initial pretext email. It's right. Hey, are you available? Question mark. Signed CEO, or something like that. And usually it takes two or three emails to get the action on intent, right? So send me gift cards, or I need you to change this routing number on this invoice, something along those lines. Do you think that those types of emails, that back and forth, instead of having somebody actually at the back end on the attacker side, hands on keyboard kind of emailing responses, would you think, do you think we have seen or will see an increase and that's why we're seeing an increase in those attacks because of these types of phishing campaigns or AI powered, I should say,
Yeah,
campaigns?
absolutely. So up until now, a lot of threat actors have farmed out their BEC chains to very poorly paid individuals and big sweatshops where, and sometimes the people are not there of their own choice, and they just
Yeah.
churn out these answers to BEC, and they don't really put a lot into them because, well, they're not supposed to. And if you're paying attention, they're typically not super convincing. But if you've got AI and ML and they're generating all of this content, they're pulling information from the web like, okay, so I can pull from Facebook that the CEO is on vacation in wherever, so they're
Mm.
adding this content to the BEC that makes it just that much more convincing. And they don't even need people in a sweatshop responding to these BEC emails now because it can just all be done automatically. So that also cuts down on costs for the threat actors. So it becomes an even more profitable venture for them than it has been up until now.
That's actually a great angle too, what you just said, leveraging the social media, not of the organization, but of the individual, right? To identify their state. Like you just said, kind of they're on vacation. They're out of the office. Interesting. All right, no, I agree. So let's get to the next one. Max, if you wanted to take this.
Yeah, so Chance had a pretty good prediction. He also had some interesting stories backing it up. He's talking about the growing trend that a lot of companies have where they're offshoring their security teams. And this it definitely can have detrimental effects, but the most important part of this is that it's the lack of communication once these teams are offshored that causes the
Mm.
problems. Because I mean, there's nothing wrong with offshoring, obviously. Like it's a great way to save money. It has a lot of benefits, but you need to communicate with the team you've offshored. So with the PDC, they've had multiple customers who just laid off their entire SOC team and purchased third-party SOC vendors. They had one specific offshore team that actually reached out to the PDC, asking the PDC to teach them how to do incident response for the organization they were contracted for. They had no idea that the PDC was a third-party vendor. They had no idea what the internal communications channels were, internal processes, nothing. They had no clue because there was no communication once the entire SOC team had been offshored. And
And for context for everybody here, the PDC is Cofense's own phishing defense center, which is our managed services for email analysis and reporting. Just in case attendees here weren't familiar with what the PDC was, I just wanted to add that in.
yeah, sorry, a bit of important context there. Um, so it's really important that people communicate because like there was another instance where I think they offshored all but one person on the SOC team, and they had that one person be the point of communication with the newly offshored company. And then that one person got let go. And for a couple months, there was no communication between the company and the offshore vendor that they had. The vendor wasn't aware there were any issues. The company wasn't aware there were any issues. No one communicated at all. So the vendor just did whatever it wanted and got paid for months before anyone noticed. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it saved him money, but that's a lot of risk to be opened up to.
Yeah, and there's a lot that could be said about this. I've personally, built and managed multiple SOCs over my career, and communication is essential. I won't say I've never made that mistake, but you learn from the mistakes, right? I often say I've done more wrong than right, but it's what I've learned that makes the difference. But yeah, absolutely, communication is critical, especially with the offshore teams, because you don't have that. Doing it myself kind of, add a little color too, because you don't have oftentimes that overlap, the handoffs between the teams, or regular syncing, or like you were just alluding to, some individuals, some organizations might assume that the third-party vendor has their own SOP, right? They have their own processes, and then okay, that's fantastic. That's why we're paying for you. Let's go, and they'll tell me if something's needed. But it's got to be an engagement. It's got to be a partnership. There is still management needed, right? You got to still have your main point of contacts. You got to have backups on both sides for that communication, regular handoffs, escalations, communication plans, all that fun stuff. And I think that goes back to, you know, what we alluded to happened in 2024, in our predictions, right? That lack of focus. We're organizations, and this is not a specific organization or person in the organization's fault, right? It's just kind of the way it is. It's just that we're so stretched thin in cybersecurity overall that, okay, we got this outsourced. Well, that's not my job anymore. I got to focus on this thing over here. Um, and working with Chance and talking with him, that's kind of obviously the same scene I believe he's feeling as well. And Max, I know you've talked to customers too. Is that kind of jive?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
So this next one is also one that I personally connect to a lot because I went to a teaching hospital for university, and I can very much confirm that this is a problem because especially with teaching hospitals, with hospitals in general, but especially with teaching hospitals, you get a constant influx of people coming in, who are there for maybe a month. Sometimes they're only there for a couple of days as they're doing some kind of rotation. So they come in, they get set up with an account, and they're like, I'm going to be here for like 5 days. My password is password. I mean, what's it going to like? Who's going to be harmed by that? I'm only going to be here for 5 days. So there's a lot of practices like this where people just aren't as careful as they should be because they're only going to be there for a short time. So they don't familiarize themselves with how the hospital handles things like if they get a suspicious email, they don't know whether they're supposed to report it or delete it or see how far they can go before telling IT about it. Like they just don't know how any of that works. So hospitals that are, related to this are really opened up to a lot of risk because of that, because they just don't have those protections in place. And honestly, without very strong guidelines and very strict regulations, it's almost impossible for these hospitals to fully protect themselves.
Yeah. So I have some history with this topic. And, over the years of doing this, doing cybersecurity, right? We've seen the trend. I've seen the trend personally relating to healthcare being more and more of a target. So historically, threat actors, hackers, whatever the words you want to use, even some of the more targeted groups or state-sponsored entities, followed the rule of medical neutrality, right? Which, in generally speaking, in wartime, military events, it's you don't hurt those helping people, right? That's why you don't attack the ambulances, you don't attack the medvacs, right? All that stuff. And the same was with healthcare. You don't hurt the helpers. However, over the last couple of years, we've absolutely seen a trend where hospitals are targeted, healthcare facilities are targeted. My opinion on that, based on the evidence we've seen in history, I've had in this space, is that it's not so much for the data, right? It's not for the HIPAA data. It's not, normally why do they do what they do, right? It's so they can sell the accounts, they can sell your dockets, they can sell your PII in the dark web for $1.50 each, how have you. Hospitals are captured audiences, and the new breed of threat actors, I say new breed, but basically where we've transitioned over the last 5-ish plus years, give or take, the new cadre of threat actors don't care about the medical neutrality of it all. They care about the money, right? So that's why I think it was 23, 22, 23, we started seeing a huge surge in ransomware attacks against hospitals, right? And I think it was 2023 was the first instance where an hospital actually closed down because of a ransomware attack. It couldn't sustain the costing and everything like that. So, to your point, Max, I think healthcare is absolutely going to be a target because it's a captured audience. It's a threat to life situation. If they're compromised, ransomware attacks, everything's locked down, they have, hours to pay before people start getting impacted, lives and health start getting impacted. And as sad as that is to say, I agree with you and with Chance. I think that's going to be an issue continuing going, into 2025 and past, just because it's that captured audience and kind of that line in the sand has been erased.
And they're especially vulnerable too because they have such immediacy needs. They need their data right away. Whereas
Exactly.
some other people in the finance sector, they can get away with not having access to their data for a fair amount of time. But if you're at a hospital, you need that patient's data right away because you've got to give them more medication, you've got whatever going on, you need that data. So they just
Exactly.
can't afford that like other industries can.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So we'll see how that plays out. And we'll loop back next year on seeing how these played out in totality. So as it stands, we talked about 2024, what we thought, what we saw. Obviously, now we obviously wanted to do this in January so we can kind of get ahead based on what we've seen over the years and what we were expecting to see in 2025. Again, feel free to use the Q&A option to submit any questions. We do have a couple here. We're going to go through time permitting. I will say if we aren't able to get to all of these questions, we will loop back with any of the askers and provide them with answers and details post webinar. So one of the first questions that came in, Max, if you're ready, I'm going to punt it to you. So you did talk a lot about AI and ML overall, and you kind of inferred with, credential phishing or with social engineering in and of itself. What do you have a position on AI specifically for things like malware generation or distribution? I'm obviously paraphrasing it a little bit, just kind of adding better context to the question posed here.
So I should start this by saying, I don't believe I made this clear earlier. I am not opposed to AI and ML. I don't think they're evil. I think they have a lot of beneficial uses, especially for defenders. They can be very helpful. But I think that there is a very significant difference between how threat actors handle AI and ML and how we handle it. Because when we're training our models, we have specific data we can train it on, and we have data we can't train it on. We're not allowed to train it on anything that's intellectual property. We're not allowed to train it on a lot of other things. But threat actors do not have those limitations. They can train their data on whatever they want. They don't have to worry about PII. They don't have to worry about copyright. They can just train on whatever they want. So when they're using their ANML to generate malware, it's easier than ever before because they don't need to like check usage rights before they grab a snippet of code from GitHub or, use an example that they found on Stack Overflow. Like, sure, they were doing that before, but now it just gets pulled for them. They don't even have to search. It just gets built into the code that they asked for. So it's really easy for them to use AI that way to generate malware. And I expect we're going to be seeing more malware as time goes on. And in fact, as we've been gathering the data for this last year, we've seen a significant increase in the number of new malware families that we've seen, more than 2023 for sure, by far. So I expect that we're going to see that trend continue as it's easier than ever for a threat actor to go, I want to create a new botnet. So I'm just going to type away for 5 minutes and I've got something that works. May not be pretty. I may have to make it a little bit better, but I've got something that works and it only took me 5 minutes.
No, that's right. I want to add in too, because I think there's not so much a misconception, but maybe just, some aren't aware, right? Malware threat actors, or, I should say threat actors that, generate and create malware. It wasn't called AI and ML, but they had, methods of programmatically creating variants. They always have. I mean, the malware a la carte kits, right? Click here. What do you want? This feature, this obfuscation, this hiding mechanism, generate. Obviously, that was limited based on how they coded it and how they built it out, right? So how many options they put in there for X, Y, and Z. So, I mean, the auto generation of malware has always been around. I mean, that's been around since the 90s, right? But what you're saying, if I'm understanding it right, is they don't need to code it in now, right? It's just give me something different that, because right with malware, it's just rapid detection on whether it's, any type of security appliance, antivirus, MDRs, XDRs, that kind of stuff. Um, I would obviously I'm boiling the ocean here, right? Go into ML, create, 10 different malware samples that are 20% difference from each other that can avoid detection. Bam. Versus trying to do the checkbox and auto generation stuff. I mean, are we talking it's that simple nowadays, you think?
Yeah, and it's also going to make things a lot easier for them because up until now, when you were looking on the market for, rats, you'd see one rat that had all these different capabilities, and the threat actor would try to provide as many capabilities for the rat as they could to make people buy it. But with AI and ML, they can generate new, unique rats for every single situation they find themselves in. So you're not going to be able to make signatures the way you were before because it's not like one rat that you're going to see a bunch of times. You're going to see unique instances every time that have different capabilities based on what the threat actor wants to do.
Okay. And that actually plays, right? Because I know in a couple of recent reports and what we've seen too, there are models, AI ML models for sale on the dark web that kind of purport to do that. We can build this model, you can auto gen X, Y, and Z. This model can, A, B, and C, and this model can do, one, two, three. So it does sound like they're almost building them, like you said, kind of more specific and tailored, but better randomization from detection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that does not sound like fun. Um, okay, so actually leading into that, another question came in is, you were saying defensive AI and ML are not bound by the same restrictions as offensive AI and ML. Do you can you give some specific examples? The way that offensive AI is doing something different. I mean, I know you already kind of touched on that one specifically, but how does it? What's the strong distinction here? And again, I'm kind of paraphrasing it based on what you just talked about. What's the strong distinction between legally defensive controlled AI and bad guy uncontrolled AI?
So just to give an easy example. So if I go online and say I find, which it's pretty easy to find if you look, a website that has a web server on it and the web server is open, you can navigate to it, you can pull down whatever you want because somebody didn't put in a password. You can find those everywhere. So I can just download all the emails from there and use that to train my AI. Really easy. Now, defensive AI can't do that. If you're building your own defensive AI to protect against emails, you have to go out, you have to find malicious emails, you have to buy them from somebody who has already confirmed they are all malicious. You have to ensure that everything is redacted before you feed it to your model because you can't have it get trained on looking for someone's name. You have to go through all these steps, and it's just a constant process, and you have to make sure they're meeting certain legal requirements because every country has different legal requirements for AI and ML. So you need to make sure you're not stepping on any toes. You got to make sure you're sourcing the data from the right people. It's just all these steps. And by the time you finally train your model and you've got it where you want it to be, threat actors have already retrained their model 3 times and they've got something entirely new.
Good point. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, because they don't have to deal with PII or HIPAA or any of these other regulations or compliance requirements. They can just kind of pop in whatever they want.
And they also have
Um,
a very rapid training cycle because all they have to do is send out a bunch of emails, see what gets clicked on, and they say, okay, this email made it through the segs and someone clicked it. So then they just retrain their model based on what they know made it through the segs.
right. And since they're using ill-gotten gains, cost isn't a factor, and they don't have any tech debt they got to deal with, right? So that always helps them. Um, all right, good. So let's keep moving here. So there's a question here I'll take. Do we have any suggestions on tools for scanning web presence, external web presences to determine what can be harvested, or recommendations for structure changes? I will say that's not, kind of the where we focus on the co-fence side. I can say personally, there is a variety of different tools you can. I mean, that the question is fairly broad, and my answer, would change depending on various, on specific details. But I'm going to boil that down. What you want to know what your risk is, what your landscape looks like. So there are COTS, commercially available tools available for web scanning. Specifically, HP has a couple, and they're going full into the code of the website and doing, risk analysis and vulnerability analysis and testing. You have tools like, Nessus, Tenable, kind of the staples, which also will do and scan websites and check the code and things along those lines. I mean, the reality is uh, you could even just go in and run something like HT track and just try to download the website yourself and see what you're getting from it. And then just search for keywords that you might think are of value or of interest, whether it's email addresses or internal names or pages that might not have been showing in the UI, but they're there and they might have some additional information. Sometimes, especially the first couple of times you play around with it, it's going to be manual. What I would say though too is, kind of an addendum to that question would be also just look at what your public facing disclosure is. Like your website is public faced disclosure. That's not a bad thing, right? I mean, that's marketing, that's sales. You want to get your, presence out there. But I'm talking about, like DNS is publicly available because it needs to be. I mean, it's, the phone book of the internet. So look at your DNS records. What do they tell? Right? Because now that's telling the attacker something. Some of this you can't change, but it's just the awareness of the threat landscape. So again, base examples. If I have Salesforce, right? Generally speaking, Salesforce, I can't tell you if they still do. I know they used to. You'd have to put a license key or at least an authorization code in your DNS record. So if I pulled your company's domain's DNS record and I saw Salesforce in there, I know you use Salesforce. So as a threat actor, I can now craft my emails to make it look like they're coming from Salesforce, right? And that happens with a lot of vendors. That's not unique to Salesforce. That's just the first one that popped into my head. So please don't think I'm picking on them specifically. But I think the broader question being asked here is threat landscape and what's your risk exposure. And there's multiple facets to it. Website is absolutely one of them. And I would say the first check would be check your vulnerabilities, vulnerability management. And then if you wanted to get real deep into it, scrape it yourself, run down. There's a lot of different programs for it. I mean, if you did searches on GitHub for this, you can find a lot of open source as well. But kind of start there, but also kind of look at that broadness. You know, if I were to extrapolate that a little bit more, I'd even go so far as, I've had issues in the past where I'd have an HR team out of a certain region, before Cofense, before I was at Cofense, HR in a region start posting job postings, and they started getting weaponized PDFs. I also had instances where attendee lists of conferences were harvested, and as soon as people came back from the conferences, they started getting malicious emails. Because hey, met you at this conference. Do you want to talk? Oh, I can't talk. Let's chat. Via this chat bot or this. Let's just keep the email going. As a form of social engineering. So there's different aspects to threat landscape. I know I'm kind of going broad on this one, but I just kind of wanted to highlight that. So at a high level, my recommendations for most websites are if you don't need to have email addresses on them, personal email addresses, not the, info at your company domain.com. Don't have personal names on them. If you, just be aware of changes you're adding to it. I'll guarantee you this one thing specific to your websites. Be a part of the conversations or awareness of if you hire a new executive as a big example, or you promote somebody and you add them by name, by picture to your website, they are going to get phished, right? I've seen it hundreds of times. A couple years ago, I got a promotion. My own picture, my name got added to the Cofense website. Within a couple of hours, I got dozens of fish. Trying to click on this. Hey, I'm the CEO. No, you're not. I just talked to them. So be careful with that. Just a tangent to that question. Okay. So, some other questions here coming in. Give me a second. Just take a look. Okay, this one's interesting, Max. This was something you mentioned, which social media platforms are you seeing mostly being used or most at risk for being used to spread malware? And then there's kind of a caveat here. And or how are you seeing social media platforms being used by threat actors?
So there's a lot of different ways this can go. So, for example, for a while there, we saw Steam community profiles were actually being used to store C2s that malware would use. Um, and then we had Steam was being used to store files. There was actually like malware available if you went to like steamwhatever.com and you follow this long, unique trail, you would get the executable. But those are things that are already there. The threat actor has to lure you into engaging them first. So that you have to take that first step. There's other things, like we've been seeing several ongoing campaigns where people have actually created a Facebook page, and they'll link the actual legitimate Facebook URL in the email, and you'll go to the page and it'll say, your account will be taken down if you don't go to this website. And then it will link you to the threat actor's actual website. So there's a lot of ways these different social media platforms can be used. And Twitter is most often used because of their very easy redirect policy.
Yeah.
You could make a Twitter link redirect to almost anything. I actually saw one earlier today that redirected to Vidar Steeler, downloaded an executable. So
Hmm.
it's really just about how you use it. So I would say, specifically with Twitter redirects, I do see that probably delivering malware more than any other social media platform. But I think Facebook is probably one of the more widely abused ones that actually uses legitimate content on the social media platform.
Interesting. And I'll even say too, excuse me, based on what we've seen, and what I've seen, right? I mean, Telegram, Discord. I mean, we've seen campaigns that are pointing to assets in those hosting environments. I've even seen comments on, wow, my brain just stopped. Uh, Comments on Stack Overflow being referenced. So basically, the link would be to Stack Overflow comment. The comment had a link to the payload. right? So, I mean, the reality is it's any port in a storm these threat actors are going to take.
My favorite, though, actually was threat actors figured out a way they would comment on a legitimate, like some actual legitimate New Zealand tax revenue service had a GitHub page, and the threat actor commented on the page, uploaded an executable in the comment, and then deleted the comment. But because of how GitHub works, the comment was still available if you followed the link. So you could still download the malware, but the comment had been deleted. It was really clever.
Wow. I don't remember that one. That's actually pretty scary, actually.
Yeah, because there was no way to tell it wasn't legitimate because it was on the actual legitimate GitHub inland tax revenue page.
Wow. Okay. We got a couple more questions here, and we do have some more time here. So obviously, anybody, if you do have, that's still attending and listening here, feel free, hit up the Q&A. So let me look through some of these here. We talked about the social media. Um, oh, here's one, Max. We haven't talked about a lot here. If a company does leverage offshore staff, third-party contractors, and they have set up solid communication, what would you say would be the biggest gap that they should invest that savings in?
So I would say training, but there's two ways this training can be. You can either use it to train AI and ML, or you can use it to train your employees. I am always a fan of training employees because personally, I think people learn better than machines. Um, if you train someone correctly, they're going to be a lot more likely to recognize something that doesn't belong than AI and ML that have been trained on a very specific data set. So in that situation, I would definitely recommend working on training employees because they're just the best defense there is, honestly. Just investing in training is the best way to go.
That's fair. And I want to answer this one too. Now, my caveat here is obviously I'm not salesperson, I'm not marketing, right? But I've been in the field for a long time, and that's actually this is part of the reason I came to CoFence. I would do it on phishing defense, and that could include training. And this is not a sales pitch for CoFence. Please don't get me wrong. To me, right, breaches happen. They're going to happen. They're going to get a way in. We all kind of know collectively, right? Phishing accounts for a majority of breaches as the entrance, if nothing else. Um, so why not get left of boom? If you're used to be a defense contractor in the U.S., so we use a lot of military terms. So left of boom means basically get to it before the explosion. And if you can lock the door before somebody gets in, you don't have to deal with cleaning up the mess they made once they get in. So to me, getting that intelligence, getting that focus, getting that visibility even within your environment on the emails that are hitting mailboxes that might not be on the up and up, to me is always kind of it is a really big thing. So just to kind of put my
And
point in for that.
I do want to say there is an argument that I've heard against investing in training people in that there's always going to be one stupid person who clicks the link because realistically,
Well, you
that's
can't say stupid person because I mean, don't
sure.
get me wrong, I click every single link and I'm not stupid. But I do make the security team mad. But I understand the concept. You're always going to get that one person. They're in the hurry. They're in the mode. They don't
Right.
care, and they're going to
But
click the link.
but the whole point of training is that they may click the link, but the person who's sitting one cubicle over, who has actually done all the training and is paying attention, they'll report it. And if you're using the right software, that email and every similar one will get pulled out of the inboxes before the person who always clicks things can even click it.
Yeah,
So you don't have to get every single person perfect. You just need to train the right people.
right. It's like herd immunity,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Okay, we got one just came in, so let's hit this one because this is an interesting question. How can we protect against impersonation? We receive emails with the names and email of our CFOs. I'm again paraphrasing other executives, and the only way we notice is if we hit the reply button. Well, couple way I'll take this first, and Max, if you got anything to add, then we could probably get one more question after this. Couple ways you can do that. One, training. Pointing at Max. One, training is a big thing. Is it something that your CFO would actually email you for? right? So some of it's kind of policy, some of it's precedents, right? Like I talk with my CEO all the time, so I get emails back and forth, with them, with my executives. So to me, it wouldn't be odd, but in that same vein, I know the cadence of our conversations and their style of interaction. So if I get something that's really weird, I'm gonna ping them on, Slack or Teams or whatever your mechanism is. Hey, you just emailed me. What is it you're actually looking for? So I'm just out of banding it, right? And I've never run into a CEO that would get mad if you're doing any type of validation like that, just to make sure, especially obviously in this space. The other side is, if your organization doesn't already do this, you can set up your email so that any email that comes from outside of your company regardless of the spoofing of the impersonation of the email or the name, add the banner. This email came from an external source. Because even though it displays your CFO in this question, email address and their name, it came from an outside mail server. So if you got that email and it's from your CFO, why does it show it's coming from an external source? They're on the same network I'm on. They sent me an email, company email, the company email. That banner should never show up. So it's that type of awareness, and to Max point, training that kind of adds to that, and there's some other technical ways that you can add some of those types of identifiers. That did this really come from source? Did it come from external? How have you? But I think it's a mixture of awareness that happened. So I mean, it's fantastic that that's happening first off, because then that adds some pragmatism to how you interact with it. But just giving those indicators and instructing, teaching your employee base that look at those indicators. If my CEO emailed me and it said, this came from an external email address, I already know that's not him. Max, any thoughts on that one?
I mean, you pretty much covered it. It's just the thing that I'd really emphasize is validating with information you already know. So, like for a while, the FBI got impersonated really badly. There were a lot of phone calls saying, "I'm from the FBI. I'm going to raid your house if you don't pay me $100 or whatever it was." And like the biggest guidance the FBI released that helped with this was saying, if you get this, don't call that number back. Call back an actual FBI number that you find and get verification. And all people had to do was just call this number that they'd find that was the actual FBI number. And the person would basically, the job was to answer the phone, say, no, that wasn't us, hang up, and then keep doing that all day. Like, you just
That's good.
do that external validation, find the information you already know, go through the company index, find their email address, send it to them, say, hey, did you send me this? And I mean, like, sure, there's like a 10% chance that they'll get mad, but if you follow up with the context of, did you ask me to transfer $3 million? Because, we should find out, then they're probably going to be like, you know what? This is a good reason to contact me.
No, valid. All right, we got time for one last question, Max, and I think we already touched on this a little bit, so I'm going to defer to you on what your thoughts are. What do you think it is and will be, the top phishing threat type that you're seeing or expect to see?
So we've seen a shift recently. Started at not too long ago, where we're seeing a shift from credential phishing to malware. And I expect to see that trend to continue. I expect to really see a lot more malware. But because of how we're seeing AI and ML generate malware, I don't think I can point to one specific threat and say we're going to see more of that because we're going to see such a diversification of malware. So I can say I think we're going to see more malware, but I can't point to one thing and say we're going to see more of that.
Do you think that we're going to see, if we balance it across each other, credential phishing still being the top by volume, or do you think malware is going to kind of encroach from total volume?
I think credential phishing will still be the top at volume just because of how easy it is to do now.
Hmm.
But I expect that we're going to see a lot more malware delivery emails showing up in SIG bypass environments
That's fair.
because it's easy to generate an email, and if you put in a bit of effort, you can make it SIG bypass. But if you're doing malware, it's it's got to be seg bypass. Otherwise, it's just not worth the amount of time that you've spent creating the executable.
Fantastic. Appreciate that, Max. And for everybody that's still here, we do appreciate your time today and hope this webinar and these conversations were very helpful for you and provided some insights into what CoFence has been seeing and is seeing and what we expect to see throughout 2025. As I mentioned in the beginning, this webinar is actually being recorded and it will be available on CoFence's website within the next couple of days, hopefully by the end of this week. So feel free to check our website out if you want to watch this again or kind of share the wealth, if you will. That being said, again, everybody, thank you for your time. Really do appreciate it.